Happy Tu B'Av, which is the day this video is being made. I want to talk about future-proofing our students and ourselves. Social and emotional learning is also tied to our own identities, and part of Jewish identity is our connection to Israel. I believe that the rapid pivot to the last fighting in Israel caught many of us and our students flat-footed. The conflict thrust us to confront some uncomfortable truths. Anti-Semitism numbers started to rise, as did anti-Israel protests. Our students, and many of us, searched for responses but learned that the old answers were not sufficient. Future-proof our staff and students and institutions, and begin to move away from the standard approach to Israel education and offer a different framework that emphasizes values rooted in Jewish tradition as well as critical thinking. Let's help our students struggle with Israel's past and present and imagine new possibilities for its future, creating a Jewish identity that is healthy and helping them with their own social and emotional development as they grow and mature into active Jewish people. The concept of future-proofing is not a new one in industrial design and electronics, but may be new to educators. This approach requires an organization that not only looks at the current landscape, but also anticipates what changes may occur in the future. The result is not just speculation, but rather a willingness to redesign the current product or process to ensure that it's still of value in the future. In other words, how can the organization, how can the synagogue, how can the religious school protect itself against possible obsolescence? Sometimes, especially with younger students, Israel education ignores the presence of Palestinians altogether and does not help students understand that Palestinians play a central role in Israel's history, culture, and politics. Many 5-year-old students are capable of understanding that Jews, Muslims, and Christians live in Israel and the surrounding areas, and that 1 in 5 people living in the state of Israel is a Palestinian citizen. Yet Israel is portrayed simply as a state for Jewish people. Virtually no Jewish materials exist that present complex Palestinian perspectives with the intent of helping American Jewish students understand Palestinian experiences. Leaders in the field of Jewish education, of Israel education, in recent years have begun to argue that presenting a mythic view of Israel undermines the goal of generating support for the country and undermines our social and emotional well-being for our children. They argue instead that educators should present Israel with more in-depth complexity, showing its problems as part of the educational process to better engage young Jews and convince them to support Israel. The extent of this kind of wrestling is limited, however, which is still considered outside the bounds of acceptable discourse in the organized Jewish community. And although some leaders are encouraging a more realistic presentation of Israel, it's rare to find a program or communal institution that's committed to depicting Israel and its relationship with Palestinian people with any real depth or complexity. This year, in my school, we are using the New York State Common Core Geography and Social Studies curriculum as a guide to develop a program for our younger students that begins to humanize the Palestinians. We choose one aspect of each grade's program and adapt it to our school. In this workshop, we'll address some of the hard questions about Israel our children and adults are asking. We must equip our students with the skills to future-proof them, using the skills of critical thinking and creativity. We are not attempting to solve the problems of the area, only to create a generation that can start talking about possibilities for the future and for peace.